Do you want to weld thin sections and end up burning through the material? Now I'm going to show you the way I weld a thin profile without it getting perforated.
No matter what welding machine you have, as long as it's an inverter, it doesn't matter if it's big or small, it will work for welding thin profiles. The first thing we're going to do is put the electrode holder on the negative terminal of our welder. This is known as direct polarity. I do this because when we weld with direct polarity, most of the heat will be in the metal and not in the electrode. So for welding thin sections, this is more practical because it helps you avoid burning through the material. What type of electrode are we going to use? There are many types of electrodes, but if I start talking about all of them, I'll never finish. So the idea is to make a simple and practical video. That's why I'm going to make this video using the 6013 electrode. This electrode though is one of the most common ones to start with in welding or metalworking. The ideal thing for welding thin profiles is to use an electrode that's about 1.6 millimeters in diameter. But this electrode isn't very common to find. That's why to weld these thin profiles, I use a 6013 electrode that's 2 millimeters thick. What amperage do I use to weld thin profiles? With this 2 millimeter electrode, I use it between 30 and 40 amps. But in this case, I'm going to use it at 30 amps. Here I have these two profiles or pipes, as you might call them in your countries, cut at 45 degrees. These pipes have a gauge thickness of 20, which is approximately almost 1 millimeter. The most important thing to be able to weld without piercing the material is the cut. The cut has to be as perfect as possible. As you can see, when you place it, there's very little light between them. So this means it's ideal for welding without piercing it. If you don't know how to cut the profiles at 40 and 45 degrees perfectly like this with a grinder or an angle grinder, I have a video on my channel where I show you how to do it. In that video, I teach you how to cut neatly at 40 and 45 degrees or at 90 with the grinder. And your cuts will turn out perfect just like mine. To weld this profile, if we have the 2.5 electrode, we will do it at 50 amps with tack welds. Now, if we have the 2 millimeter electrode like I do, we will do it with a continuous bead. We are going to tack both ends. Once we have it tacked, we can weld continuously. The movement we are going to make is none. What we're going to do is drag the electrode backwards, following the joint line at a fairly fast speed. In this type of welding, you don't need to make any side-to-side movements. You just need to slide the electrode backwards. Another thing to keep in mind is having a steady hand. To have a steadier hand, you need to be as comfortable as possible. That's why the idea is to hold the electrode holder clamp with one hand. With the other hand, the one we're not using to hold it, will rest it on the table and also hold the electrode holder clamp. This will give us a much steadier hand and it will allow us to weld without it moving too much. Once you're settled, we'll start practicing by sliding the electrode back, just like I'm doing. Once you more or less have the previous practice down, you need to use the proper protection or as much protection as possible. Long sleeves, gloves, and most importantly, the welding mask. Once we have all the protective gear, we're going to do the final practice. We rest our hand on the table and grab the electrode holder clamp with both hands. This is to have better control when handling the electrode. We rest the electrode, and when it starts to make the arc, all we do is slide the electrode backward. Once you have a clear idea of the movement, you can start practicing with the machine turned on. Let me remind you that I weld with direct polarity. The electrode holder clamp is on the negative. This depends on each welder. It works very well for me to do it this way. I start with 2 tacks. Once I have the 2 tacks, I need to clean the slag and then start welding along the seam. And that's how you get a continuous weld with an electrode on a thin metal section. In direct plurality, the slag will be harder to remove, but with a few taps it comes off. As you can see, the bead itself isn't very aesthetic, but in these cases, we don't need it to be aesthetic. We need it to be a strong and sturdy bead, and in this case, that's what we achieved.
Well, here I already have the piece welded. As you can see, the bead isn't very neat, but the good thing is that the piece is welded. If you want, you can polish it to make it look nicer. But that's up to each person. That's how it turned out. If you enjoyed this video, please follow me. It helps a lot.